And we are now recording. We can get things kicked off here. So, hello and good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Chris Cruz, and I'm with the marketing team here at InterVision, and I'll be your MC, I guess, for lack of a better word, for today's conversation on how to protect your organization from ransomware. Of all the subjects that we'd like to be talking to you guys about today, ransomware is not one that anyone really is excited to be thinking about, but it is a comprehensive ransomware protection strategy is the cost of doing business today, right? And we're seeing that more and more as this threat evolves and matures. And I think it's important, and we all at InterVision think it's important to bring as much knowledge as we can to the table on how you can protect your organization from this threat and this new, cost of doing business. So moving forward here, I just wanted to talk a little bit about today's conversation and the ways that you can interact with us, because that interaction means a lot to us. You've got two options for today's conversation. You can either use the chat functionality if there's something you want to share. If you want that to go out to everyone, you just have to select the option to send it to everyone. If you'd like it to go just to our panelists, you'll see an option for that as well. You can also use the Q&A functionality at any time in the conversation today to ask a question. And I'll go through and be checking both the chat and the Q&A. And if there's opportunities to interject in the presentation from our guests today, I will interrupt and find that. But at the very least, we'll reserve the questions for a formal Q&A at the end of the session. But please don't hesitate to reach out and interact with us via the chat or Q&A. We very much appreciate the back and forth, and we think it helps strengthen the conversation overall if we're having interaction from you guys. So if we want to jump to the next slide here, I'll just really quickly cover sort of the key topics. When you register for the webinar, you saw the big three items we were going to be focusing on. We're going to revisit these at the end to make sure that we did a good job covering these. But really our focus areas are how to align your operations with the excellent standard that's already been set by the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. We're going to go through that at each level and kind of talk through what you can do to align to that framework as it stands today, because it does create a very comprehensive perspective on how to protect your organization. And then secondarily, we're going to talk about how we see organizations assume that the security tools and the insurance policies and the backups that they may have in place are doing everything they need to protect them, but why sometimes those approaches alone are falling short and still leaving organizations vulnerable. So we're going to talk about that very specifically as well. And then finally, we're going to talk about how you can adopt a not if but when policy and approach to breach response and recovery if and when your organization is attacked by a ransomware breach. So I've got a great group of guests. We want to go to the next slide. I could spend an hour introducing each of these individuals, speaking to their deep expertise and background in supporting companies mature their resiliency and security. But I will say that across these three individuals, we have as good of a group as any to talk about not only the protective and preventative side of security. With Zach Moore, he's been living the reality of helping support our clients through our Security Operations Center, but also the executive perspective that wraps around all that with Alan Jenkins. He's our VP of Cyber Consulting. He really acts as that vCISO for our clients and steps in and really helps them get that executive perspective of how these pieces fit together. And then finally, Adam Scamahord leads the charge at InterVision on the resiliency side of really, how do you respond and recover to these incidents when they happen, so that you don't have to pay a ransom and you can recover quickly and with confidence. So across these three guys, I think you've got a good a team as any to speak to this topic. And I'm going to let the smart people finally take over here and get this thing rolling. And Zach, I'm going to turn it over to you to get the conversation going.
Fantastic. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. So we're going to start today with a not terribly controversial statement. Ransomware is a modern disaster. Much in the same way that a flood or an earthquake or a hurricane can take your business operations and bring them to a grinding halt, Ransomware is no longer what it was 5, 10 years ago with single computers getting hit, and then you have to reimage something and spend a little bit of time and money to bring a user or two back up. Nowadays, this is leading headlines in the news with supply chains being disrupted as meatpacking plants are brought down across the country, or entire local and state level government entities being taken down, or the Colonial Pipeline getting hit, causing panic buying of gasoline on the entire eastern seaboard of the US. So today we're no longer talking about uh, singleton compromises. We're talking about disasters in the ransomware space. Um, so anytime we're talking about major events like this, we have to approach them from a standpoint of risk. So how do you approach risk? Risk is always going to be a factor of two things: likelihood and impact. Let's start with the likelihood portion. In 2020, Forrester surveyed a large number of organizations and found that 59% had undergone some level of cyber breach within the last year. 59%. That's more than half. When you then factor in the fact that 52% of those breaches were caused by malicious attacks, this brings us back to the evolving nature of ransomware. We're not talking about bad actors leaving bombs on the internet where there's a link or a picture or an ad somewhere that someone will click and compromise one computer. We're talking about ransomware as a service being offered on the dark web, where there are websites and 24/7 call centers that potential bad actors can talk to experts to order exploit kits that only take a few clicks to deploy to target an organization for a full-scale ransomware attack. We're talking about malicious phishing campaigns where the goal is to get into a customer environment and cause as much damage and extract as much money as possible. This is no longer a case of small one-off attacks. This is organization-wide risk. When we then look at this combined with the impact, in 2021, the average cost of a data breach in the US was just shy of $4 million. The highest ransoms paid were over 10 times that. Combine that with the fact that mean time to detect across all surveyed businesses was 287 days. That's almost a year. That's dwell time that bad actors are inside your environment, moving around, compromising every layer of your security, looking at all your communication, exfiltrating data, possibly even using your business to compromise your clients' businesses, compromising your backups so that even if you want to restore, you can't. When you put all this together, it paints a fairly dramatic picture of the reality of ransomware. Ransomware attacks saw a 300% increase year over year, 2020 and 2021. There's a very real problem, and it's only getting worse every year. So that brings us to our second problem, the problem of solving the first problem. Many of you have looked at different tools out there, each claiming to be the silver bullet that solves the problem of ransomware. The problem is you need endpoint tools, and you need network tools, and you need monitoring tools. And all these different tools come from different providers and require different skill sets and different people and processes to run them. So perhaps you talk to security service providers. And each of these security service providers can tell you how to run one or two of these tools or help you put it together a security posture. But then none of those security providers support any sort of resiliency or recovery. So you go out and you face the same problem again. You're looking at resiliency tools. And how do you spin up the people and processes to run this? So maybe you talk to resiliency providers and now they don't interact with your security providers. And what you're left with is a complex mess of puzzle pieces that don't fit together, that don't work together, teams that don't talk to each other, processes that involve one team but not another, so that when a crisis hits, the response is haphazard and incomplete. And you end up losing time and money as you try to bridge the gap. And we recognize these challenges. Without a comprehensive strategy in place, many of our customers have tools in place, but only about 20% have dedicated staff to monitor and respond, meaning that your organizations are vulnerable. We had a customer that we ran an incident response with who we found out after the fact that their firewall had thrown over 10,000 alerts that there was a breach in progress, but they didn't have anyone monitoring that firewall. So you can have the best tools in the industry, and if no one's working with them, if no one's monitoring them, if you don't have experts making sure that they stay up to date and that they deliver their tools to teams that can actually read the events, they're not worth anything. And so you might think, well, insurance will protect us. If the worst happens and we get hit, we'll use insurance to pay for the ransom. Well, bad news, only about 8% of paying organizations actually recover all their data. That's 1 in 12. 1 in 12 organizations paying a ransom gets their data back. And then you also put a big target on your head to be the victim of the next attack, because the bad guys know that you'll pay out. And on the backups front, backups are often attacked as part of the compromise. And Adam, I think you have a story regarding an issue with that.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah. So like Zach mentioned, backup specifically can give a false sense of security. Often attackers will go after the backups as well as their important data. And even if good backups exist, restoring into a source environment while forensic investigations, data isolation, and potentially criminal investigations are taking place, it's complicated at best, and it's often impossible. In one recent incident response, a security team was attempting to help a school system safely restore from the school's backup solution. Unfortunately, this response came in October, and the most recent usable good backup was from January. So being a school, you can imagine the changes that work between January and October. And in this instance, it took the school weeks to get back up into an operational state. This is unfortunately a common story that we've witnessed time and again across the landscapes of businesses and different sized organizations. And any IT-sized team rarely has the capacity or processes to adequately test their recovery solution against the threat of cyber attack.
Thanks, Adam. What this tells us is that a piecemeal approach doesn't really work. It provides a false sense of security. So the question must be asked, how are you addressing security operations? So what we see here is the National Institute of Standards and Technology's Cybersecurity Framework. The layers of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So in the identify phase, we have to ask, do you have an accurate picture of your threat posture and exposure across all attack surfaces? Do you know where your important data is? Do you know what the entry points to your network are? Do you know where the crown jewels are and how to protect them? Once we have that information, you go into the next phase, and you have to ask, are you confident that your workloads are secured and configured properly? Do you have the correct tools in place and the people and processes to work them, to configure them properly, to make them do what you think that they're doing? So that in the event of an attack, you can detect the bad guys trying to get into your network. Can your team spot the threats early? Can your teams spot the threats 24/7 by 365? Because the bad guys like to attack in the middle of the night. In 2021, we saw a definite rise in the increase of attacks that happen on Friday night before a holiday weekend, because the bad guys want to get into your network when your IT staff is on the beach in Tahiti drinking Mai Tais, because they know that they'll have a longer time in your network to get what they want. And then you need to have the people and processes in place to respond. And you respond to threats and intrusions quickly and efficiently. Can you do it 24/7 by 365? Can you do it across all of your sites and all of your various tools? And once you've got your response in place and you've got a potential compromise contained, can you recover? Have you tested your recovery process to ensure that you can get back to business quickly? Is your process set so that it is tuned? Do you test your backup so that when the worst happens, you can quickly respond rather than scrambling at the last minute to come up with, well, what are we going to do? True protection requires a comprehensive approach. You have to be able to cover all aspects of this entire framework, and you have to be able to do it well. You have to have coordinated efforts. So that brings us to InterVision's approach to comprehensive protection. And that is Ransomware Protection as a Service, or RPAS, delivers the only comprehensive protection package out there. We have the people, processes, and technology across the three main containers that I'm going to talk about here. Our first is SOC as a service. We make sure that you have comprehensive endpoint protection in place. We make sure that you have detection and response capabilities, 24/7 monitoring from our team of industry experts. We have analysts, we have threat hunters, we have threat intelligence being developed to make sure to identify where you're vulnerable, to help protect you, to detect the threats as they try and come through the door, and to help you respond when they do. As part of that response, we've got our recovery as a service options with disaster recovery and backup as a service. This is managed backups, managed disaster recovery. This is a secure cloud landing zone so that we make sure that if your data center is a crime scene, you have somewhere to restore to. This is testing over time to make sure that backups are up to date, that backups are working well, that your environment that you're restoring to is available, and that the process for disaster recovery is already in place, already tested, and ready to go at the snap of a finger when the worst happens. And then wrapped all around this is our vCISO. That's Virtual Chief Information Security Officer. They go end to end of the spectrum, helping you to identify the issues in your environment with risk assessments, compliance assistance, helping you to identify how to protect your environment, helping you to plan how to implement that, and working with you to better shape the detection capabilities that go through our SOC to make sure that everyone is ready with response plans so that when incidents are there, we have the playbooks in play to determine who's on our escalation chain, who's responding, who's in charge, who's responsible, who's consulted, who's informed, to make sure that the response in the time of a crisis is right there and ready to go. And then helping to direct recovery efforts. They act not only as your trusted advisor, but also as the incident response coordinator in the case that that disaster strikes, to be down in the trenches with you and help you get back to business as usual as quickly and efficiently as possible. And this is the comprehensive approach. So to dive a little deeper into each of these different segments, we're going to start out talking about SOC as a service. So the first piece is to ensure that your endpoints, some of the most vulnerable entry points across your organization, are protected. We make sure that you either have an existing state-of-the-art EDR solution, that's endpoint detect and response, in place, or we'll provide one. We can help advise you on that and work with you with your needs to come up with the right solution. This protects your vulnerable endpoints. And then it also feeds into our broad visibility platform. This also takes all of the metadata from your network traffic, as well as the logs from your security infrastructure and authentication platforms, and puts them all in one place to be monitored and analyzed for anomalous behavior, indicating possible compromises 24/7 by 365 by a team of experts. On top of this, we have data enrichment, going out and gathering data from all monitored endpoints, all monitored customers to identify new threats as they come in, threat hunting, dark web intel, vulnerability data, cross-platform correlation of logs to make sure that we have the best possible picture of threats in motion. Combine on top of that, both public and in-house developed threat intel to help identify threats as they come in. And then we've got managed containment as well, so that if compromised endpoints are identified, we can have playbooks on how to isolate those. We can proactively isolate workstations. We can reactively isolate servers that we see compromises on, so that as threats try and enter your environment, and if a threat tries to spread, we can limit its scope. To talk about the next piece, I'm going to throw it over to Adam to talk about the recovery operations lifecycle.
Thanks, Zach. So to solve ransomware from a backup and recovery perspective, we believe the first step is to build a ransomware recovery landing zone. So that means there's an area with available compute, networking to run your workloads on, but with no access to the source's accounts or networking. And that creates an air gap, a network isolation from the attack planes of an organization's production data center. The backup needs to be immutable, and that's a fun buzzword you may hear a lot around ransomware. It gets thrown around a lot by organizations and solutions that may not always meet the definition, but it simply means that the data cannot be changed and it can't be deleted. The solution also needs to back up more than just VMs, servers, databases. It needs to have the ability to protect SaaS workloads such as SharePoint data, Office 365 accounts, OneDrive. It needs to be able to back up and protect file systems, NAS backups, other data lake kind of solutions. And it needs to work with both on-prem data centers as well as hybrid cloud solutions, and it needs to be multi-cloud capable. That's the world we're living in. Once the solution is built and developed, our experience has shown that you have to perform recovery testing. And we test more than just basic functions. We test ransomware scenarios that include steps to understand how the workloads are going to behave when they come up in that recovery landing zone that I talked about. And we want to know how we're going to isolate those workloads, how we're going to validate that the data is safe, and how we're going to reconnect those in the case of a ransomware disaster. So the data from all of that testing is used to build recovery health processes that look for key indicators of change in the environment, but also make sure that the solution is keeping up with the growth of the data that's being protected to ensure regular testing is done and continue to update that playbook. So everyone talks about having a run book. You heard me say playbook. The problem with ransomware is that a single run book won't fit an actual disaster scenario. As attackers get more and more intelligent, every single one looks a little bit different. And so we solve this by building plays. Each play is developed from the test plans and scenarios that are tested, and the teams are trained on how to handle different diverged paths of recovery based off of what's happening and what the actual need is. When the unexpected does happen, the recovery team can then respond quickly and recover the data both safely and securely. Additionally, there has to be a team in place to handle the operations of both the daily backups and replication to make sure all those systems are functional. The data that they are protecting is secure, and this team remediates issues, they patch systems, they maintain that ransomware recovery landing zone. And they have to be kind of a jack of all trades, understand the security, the networking, the infrastructure, and the backup systems. With all of these pieces in place, the circle you see here kind of continues to test and retest and reset itself and continually improve the operations of the ransomware recovery service. So with all that said, I'm going to kick it over to Alan to talk about the third piece of our PAS.
Thanks, Adam. So another unique component that we think is really important to the solution is what we call our vCISO, which is a virtual Chief Information Security Officer. And what we aim to do here is to align a dedicated senior information security person with your organization. So we want this person to become very well aware of how your business works. So we want to understand the key business objectives, the things that make the organization tick. From there, then we're going to work to measure your security program and see how it aligns and how mature it is to align with those business objectives. We want to measure this through industry standards so we can leverage things like the previously noted NIST Cybersecurity Framework or other frameworks that may be applicable to this environment. And our team's got experience in a number of these different worlds. Also, what may come into play here may be things like compliance. So if there's a healthcare organization, we may need to look at this through the lens of something like HIPAA. If they're processing credit cards, we may need to look through the lens of PCI. But ideally, we want to measure the maturity of the program to see just how it stacks up, and then we can develop improvement plans to continue to improve the overall security program. Secondarily, we want to do more tactical risk assessments. So what are the day-to-day things that are in the environment that we can assess and determine where risks and gaps lie so that we can constantly improve the environment? And we look through the lens of what makes the business objectives, what technology makes those business objectives come to life. And then we want to measure those things from a risk perspective, going back to impacts and likelihood that these items will be attacked. And then finally, since the virtual CISO will be very well aware of all of the security operations and how they integrate with the organization, will be a key component should anything break through these layers and we have an incident to deal with. So if we do, then our virtual CISO will be a part of the triage team and lead that team in any sort of response and recovery operations that we have. I'll kick it back over to Zach.
Thanks, Alan. So I said earlier that there was no one silver bullet that can prevent or mitigate ransomware. So what we need is a comprehensive solution. Here we have all of the pieces to harden and monitor your environment, to provide ongoing advisement, to provide recovery, testing, and processes, all together put under one umbrella with one set of contacts and one organization running it, so that the people, processes, and technology come together under one blanket to make it easy for you to protect your organization and keep business running. We've got the SOC as piece to monitor and warn for threat activity to help minimize the time that bad actors are in your environment. We've got the vCISO piece to provide that ongoing advisement and security maturity to provide risk mitigation and minimize risk. And we've got the recovery piece, which gets you back to business as usual in the event of a disaster to minimize service disruption. All that comes together to form the one comprehensive offering that is out there that takes you across the entire landscape to keep you safe. And here we've got an actual example of how all these pieces fit together in the event of an actual incident. And I'm going to throw it back to Alan as an incident coordinator to run us through what happened here and what this all means.
Sure. So in this example that we posted here, what we want to show is what a likely event might look like. So in this case, we've got an attack that begins logging into multiple systems early in the morning. As the team alluded to, a lot of the times these things don't happen in the middle of the day. You're going to see events that happen late in the evening, early in the morning for obvious reasons. In this case, we've got an attack that starts early in the morning. It starts attacking multiple systems all at one time. One of the key components of our solution is we're going to have visibility into this sort of activity happening. So our SOC team is going to immediately see this activity, and they're going to escalate to the triage team. The triage team will be made up of a number of members of the team internal to our group. One of those members would be our virtual CISO. At that point, we'll analyze the information that the SOC team sees, and we'll come up with the approach to talk to the customer about what do we see and what should we do. And this is all happening in a matter of minutes. From there, In this case, we may analyze and determine where is patient zero? Where did this problem start? And what are the infected systems? We can work with our team then to isolate that system. So we can take that or those systems offline. We can also take additional steps. So if we believe there are compromised accounts, we can go in and do password resets, and we can start to queue up the recovery processes for the affected systems. Finally, we can move to a state where we're recovering that data. And as we recover the data that's been impacted, we're scanning it for the indicators of compromise that we saw come in. So we're not doing a blind scan. We're actually looking for the things that we saw happen and making sure that we bring back a clean environment. From the timeline here, you can see this is a rapid process. So our hope is for early detection and then to move quickly to contain. So we want to stop the spread. So 1 or 2 machines impacted versus an entire organization, and then rapid recovery to a clean state. And then finally, what we'll do is we're going to spend some time doing lessons learned afterwards. What happened to allow this thing to happen? So in this case, we may determine that we could have done some geofencing on the firewalls. Maybe this was an attack that started with localities hitting our firewall connections that we don't do business with. So let's just cut that out altogether. And then we may also determine that something like PowerShell scripting was used to laterally move throughout the environment. So let's deploy some group policy objects to limit that exposure as well. So not only do we want to rapidly detect and contain and then recover the environment, we also want to constantly improve the environment and determine how we can keep these things from happening in the future.
Sounds good. Thanks, Alan.
Absolutely.
So just to focus on these outcomes, on the detect and protect side, the issue here was identified within 5 minutes, and a full report on what was going on was delivered to the client within 25 minutes. Compare that to the 287-day industry average for dwell time. Rapid identification of threats as they come through is key to limiting your risk and your exposure in the event of a cyber breach. On the respond and recover side, the compromise was contained, and a 40 terabyte file server was restored in under 10 minutes after we got the go ahead from the client to do so. 10 minutes, that's instantaneous. That minimizes the time that your business is unable to operate. That means that you feel very little impact when these events come through, thanks to prior developed processes and tested run books and playbooks and expertise to make everything operate smoothly. And then on the advise and adapt side, not only was there an incident coordinator running all this, but also after the fact, during the post-mortem, the method of entry and the method of spread were identified, and the client environment was hardened to help protect them even further in the future. So in this case, the total time of the breach was a little under 90 minutes, and the client's environment came out stronger than it was in the end. That's the power of the service. That's the power of a comprehensive approach with one team of experts running the entire tool. And so, in addition, with this service, you get a set of industry-leading service level agreements. 4 nines uptime on infrastructure targets for replication to make sure that during a disaster, your landing zone is available to put your disaster recovery data in to bring you back up quickly. 3 nines of uptime availability on all services to make sure that applications are accessible and data isn't lost. Response teams, response SLAs with times measured in minutes, anytime, 24/7 by 365. An incident response SLA that's baked right into the work order with security analysts and a dedicated incident coordinator to help out in the event of a ransomware incident. They're down in the trenches with you, making sure that all efforts are in progress to get you back up as quickly as possible. And then recovery time objective SLAs that are also laid out in your order form that include target time for everything from virtual machines booting, operation systems booting, and actually getting applications back to runtime state. So why InterVision ransomware protection as a service? Because it's the most comprehensive approach available. No other solution or solution provider out there delivers the protection, response, and recovery capabilities in a single managed service. You don't want to end up with that disparate pile of puzzle pieces that don't fit together. It's backed by industry-leading SLAs, guaranteed response and recovery times to meet your unique objectives. And we work with you to find all of this during the process. And we're a trusted leader in data recovery. Our resiliency solutions have been recognized as a leader by Forrester and Gartner, have an overall 5-star client satisfaction score, recognized as a leader in the industry to get you back on your feet quickly. As far as our other qualifications and expertise, I'm not going to run through every item on here, just a few things to note. 25 plus years of experience with these services. None of this is new. These are all things we've been doing for a long time and have a lot of expertise in. Experience working with high compliance standards, HIPAA, PCI, SOC 2, HITRUST, and others. Leader in data recovery. Experience across multiple verticals. So aiming at whatever industry you're in, we've got clients there. We've worked with them before. We know how to help you out specifically. Cloud certifications to make sure that we have the expertise to deliver that safe landing zone, to make sure that in the case of disaster recovery, we have the expertise to bring you back up quickly. And then the previously discussed industry-leading SLAs. So to wrap it all up, questions you have to ask yourself. How do your operations align to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework? Do they at all? Have you considered it before? Are there gaps? Where do your security tools, insurance coverage, and backups fall short? Do you have the people, process, and technology to keep you safe? And then how can you implement a not if, but when approach to breach response and recovery? Going back to that second slide, 59% of businesses breached in 2020, and that's only gotten worse year over year. 300% increase in number of ransomware attacks. Even with the best tools out there, the bad guys are determined, and they're eventually going to get through. You need to have a plan in place that's comprehensive on how to detect, protect, and recover. So that wraps us up. We recommend you connect with an expert today, intervision.com/contact, talk to your account manager. I'm going to throw it back to Chris to start running through Q&A.
Yeah, thanks so much, Zach, and thank you for today's presentation. And thank you everyone for joining and sticking around. We've had an engaging conversation here today. Everyone's been got some good questions coming in, and also everyone's been on for the entire call. So thank you for that. Just a quick word. At InterVision, we really are about driving meaningful and measurable business outcomes through a comprehensive portfolio of technology, services, and solutions. Right, there are plenty of providers out there that will sell you a piece of technology. There are lots of managed services providers out there. There are a lot of consultancies out there that handle pieces and parts of the total equation. What we like to do is take a step back, like this ransomware protection as a service offering, for example, and really look at this. What outcome are we driving? And with ransomware protection, it really is about ensuring you never have to pay a ransom again. And the client outcome you saw demonstrated in the early example is really, us putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak. So if you do want to engage in a conversation, please do not hesitate to reach out. We can help you understand where your gaps are today, how to take that first step forward. We recognize this stuff is complicated, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you want to engage in a conversation. So with all that out of the way, I do want to open it up for further Q&A. I do have a few questions I'd like to get out there to get things started. Adam, Alan, or Zach, feel free to chime in, whoever feels most equipped to answer. But this first one's kind of a little bit broad, but I think it makes sense, right? Like, this is overwhelming. Where would you even start day one of trying to what's the single most important thing I can do today?
Well, I think a lot of people become overwhelmed by cybersecurity. What we don't want them to do is to put their head in the sand and ignore it because it's complex. Oftentimes, one of the things that we recommend is to do some level of assessment to start, to understand where are you now and where are the gaps and what gaps should you fill. So that's really a good start point. A lot of people are being impacted or contacted by their insurance relationships. So that's a driver as well, because a lot of the cyber insurance companies have become much more due diligent in how they approach providing policy coverage. So they're asking tough questions of their customers. And so we do a fair amount of work in partnership with some of these folks at insurance companies. So we're starting to incorporate that into some of our security risk assessment strategies as well, so that we can help people be prepared to have that discussion with their insurance company or with their business partners, because being cyber secure is becoming more and more of a have to have and have to prove to do business with others.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Alan.
Sure.
So looking through here, sorry, multi-factor authentication makes connecting more difficult. Is it really necessary? Is there any way to make that process easier?
So I'll take this one as well, because I do hear this. What some people might not want to hear is sometimes security can be inconvenient, right? So that can be challenging. It's our job as security practitioners to help reduce risks to the environment, to help improve business processes, but we should also try to find ways that improve security while not imposing additional burdens as much as we can. So certainly multi-factor, which says when I log in, I'm not done. I've got to do something else to validate that I am who I am. That's a great practice. What we need to do when we deploy tools like that is to find ways to make that not so burdensome. So in that corporate or customer environment, how can we determine how frequently do we need to check a multi-factor to make sure that you are who you say you are? What parameters can we put around it to say that we do it so frequently, or do we do it from different locations or whatnot? So there's some consultative approaches to take there to help improve the security posture while not make it a pain to get people authenticated, so to speak.
Awesome. Awesome. One hint here related to SOC 2 specifically. So our firm successfully underwent a SOC 2 assessment. Do we need to do anything further to be secure?
So I'm hogging up the responses, so I'll do this one, and then I'll give somebody else a chance. But I've also heard this one a fair amount in working with customers, and you could replace SOC 2 with another assessment or another standard, right? So a lot of times people will say, well, we just went through this audit, we should be good. The challenge there is that some of these audits are not necessarily security specific. There may be security parameters included in the audits, but they're not security specific. So taking a step back and realizing that something like a SOC 2 is good, and it can provide some assurances that you are following some good practices. It's not a license to say, yes, we are secure. And in fact, while we offer security risk assessments, and I think they're an important part of the program, as mentioned earlier, security is sort of cyclical. It never stops. And so that's one of the challenges that we've seen on the incident response side. Is I have worked with a number of people who have had some fairly severe incidents, ransomware and the like, where after the fact they're asking questions about how could this have happened to us? We had put this thing or that tool or followed this audit process. And the challenge is that there isn't a silver bullet, and you don't get to do something and be done. This is constant. The bad guys don't turn off on Christmas Day or after 5 o'clock and stop attacking. So we have to always be diligent in how we approach these things.
Perfect. Well, I think that handles all the questions, unless I see another one come here at the last moment. Very sincerely thank you to our presenters and to everyone for joining. I think this was a great dialogue. And for everyone's awareness, we will be reaching out with a recording of today's session so you can review at your leisure. We'll also have an opportunity to connect with one of our experts by just responding to our emails. So again, thank you for everyone's time, and please do not hesitate to reach out and get a contact going so we can engage in a discussion if you'd like to learn more about our offering or just understand where your gaps are today. Have a great day, everybody, and thanks for the time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.